So think about the fairy tales and legends you grew up with, the ancient myths filled with gods and monsters. Have you ever wondered if maybe, just maybe, they aren't just pure fantasy? What if instead they're actually highly complex, encoded scientific records? Imagine if these stories were designed as massive, protective time capsules, hiding absolute truths about astronomy and human evolution right in plain sight. In this explainer, we're diving deep into exactly that idea. We're going to figure out why ancient myths might actually hold profound, hidden truths. To do this, we're unpacking a fascinating piece of 19th century writing that attempts to completely rewrite human history. It claims that the world's most famous myths, the ones we all know, are really just highly technical records of our ancient past, completely misunderstood by modern society. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the secret code of myths. Second, the mathematics of the divine. Third, evolution before biology. Fourth, we'll actually decode some famous ancient myths. And finally, ancient wisdom versus science. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Secret Code of Myths. Finding the Lost Key.
To really wrap our heads around this theory, we first have to explore the claim that modern readers have essentially lost the key to ancient texts. Our main source for this explainer is a dense, incredibly ambitious book from 1888 called The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky. We're focusing specifically on Volume 2, which is all about anthropogenesis, or the origin of humanity. Her goal with this book was huge. Nothing less than synthesizing science, religion, and philosophy into one unified theory of everything. And to pull that off, Blavatsky argued we have to fundamentally change the way we read ancient texts. Her whole argument rests on this concept of the esoteric. Basically, she claims that over the centuries, humanity totally lost the key to ancient scriptures, like the Mosaic books. It's kind of like losing the password to a giant encrypted file. Without this key, we're stuck with only the exoteric, the literal, surface-level stories that often seem confusing or contradictory. But when we use the esoteric key, we unlock the innermost metaphysical and scientific truths that were deliberately hidden away to protect this sacred knowledge. Section 2. Mathematics of the Divine, the Code of the Gods. Okay, so how does this lost key actually work in practice? Well, according to Blavatsky, names in ancient texts aren't just names. They're Kabbalistic number games. Take Moses, for example. In this system, Moses equates to the numerical value of 345. Jehovah equals to 543. The text points to a famous biblical passage where God tells Moses he can only see his, quote, back parts or behind. Esoterically speaking, that is literally just the mathematical reversal of 345 into 543. It's a built-in numerical check system used to secretly preserve exact astronomical measurements, like the lunar year. Crazy, right? The absolutely crucial point here is that when you apply this mathematical and astronomical key, the whole literal idea of a single localized creator deity just vanishes. In Blavatsky's esoteric reading, Jehovah isn't some man in the sky. The name is actually an astronomical mask. It represents a specific triad, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus. The argument here is that the deities of our myths are really just placeholders for giant cosmic forces and planets. Section 3. Evolution before biology, the occult timeline. So if myths are hiding truths, what exactly are they hiding about our own origins? Well, Blavatsky lays out a timeline that is, frankly, wildly unorthodox. Actually, scratch the whole evolving from physical apes idea. She argues we started out as phantom-like, sexless, ethereal shadows. Then, from there, we allegedly evolved into what she calls sweat-born beings, and after that, into giant androgynous or hermaphroditic entities. All of this supposedly happened long, long before humanity ever crystallized into the physical, separated sexes we know today. Section 4. Decoding famous ancient myths, the case studies. Let's actually put this esoteric decodering to the test. We'll start with what is probably the most famous story of all time, the Genesis creation of Adam and Eve. The text asks us to look really closely at the specific phrasing in Genesis. It says, the Elohim created they him, male and female, created he them. Blavatsky argues that Adam was never, ever intended to be read as one single physical guy. Instead, Adam is a collective term. It represents that early, semi-spiritual, androgynous phase of collective humanity we were just talking about. Think about the story of Eve being pulled from Adam's rib. The exoteric, literal view makes it sound like some kind of magical surgical procedure. But the esoteric view? That's totally different. The text claims the Adam and Eve story actually represents these inactive androgynous, slowly, over countless generations, separating into distinct physical male and female sexes. And that process eventually produced fully separated human beings, which the story represents as Cain and Abel. Now, this decoder ring isn't just for biblical texts. Let's pivot to Greek mythology for a second. Consider the famous tale of Leda giving birth to the twins Castor and Pollux after a visit from Zeus, who was in the form of a swan. According to Blavatsky's reading, this myth is actually a perfect allegory for that bizarre sweat-born phase of evolution we mentioned earlier. This was supposedly the era where those ethereal, shadow-like forms began to create much more solid astral bodies. So, the myth of Leda and her twin sons actually contains a hidden dual meaning. It's secretly recording the exact moment in our distant past when shadowy human forms first began to take on true physical density. And then there's Prometheus. You probably know him as the famous Greek titan who defied the gods, stole fire, and gave it to humanity. The literal reading here is pretty straightforward. Prometheus gave early humans physical fire so they could cook food and not freeze to death. But esoterically, this fire represents something vastly more profound. Blavatsky claims Promethean fire represents the literal spark of human consciousness and the dawn of sexual reproduction. It's a complete game changer. It's not about cooking, it's marking the exact moment we became intellectually self-aware as a species. Section 5. Ancient Wisdom versus Science, the Final Clash. Okay, so this brings us to a truly massive claim from the text. Blavatsky asserts that physical, sexually reproducing humanity has been on this planet for 18 million years. 18 million. That number completely defied the 19th century geological and biological models of her time. Scientists back then were just beginning to grasp how old the Earth really was, but they definitely still viewed human existence as a relatively recent thing. To put that into perspective, the text goes even further. It states that this 18 million year era of physical humanity was preceded by a staggering 300 million years of purely mineral and vegetable development. Think about that. 300 million years of esoteric plant life just setting the stage, long before a physical human ever walked the earth. Blavatsky definitely didn't pull her punches either. She heavily critiqued materialist theologians who believed humanity was literally formed from physical dust. But she equally mocked Darwinian scientists who argued for spontaneous generation from protoplasm. She flat out rejected the idea that physical organisms are the only forms of life. Her stance was that looking solely at physical, fossil evidence completely ignores the vast esoteric history of our ethereal ancestors. And she knew exactly how her work was going to be received. She wrote, "Science, which knows only of physical organisms, will feel indignant, and materialistic theology still more so." She wasn't trying to fit in. This text proudly positioned itself as a radical, esoteric challenger to the mainstream. It was demanding that people rethink everything they thought they knew about where we came from and what our oldest stories actually mean. So after seeing how this text attempts to decode our oldest legends, using math, astronomy, and this radical evolutionary timeline, it really comes back to our main focus: why ancient myths might hold profound truths. Will you ever look at a Greek myth or a biblical story the same way again? It forces us to ask a pretty amazing question. Are the stories of our ancestors just simple fables, or were they deliberately engineered as the ultimate time capsules, the very last surviving records of a forgotten world?